clearly it was fear of death that drove these civilizations to create the immortal cell, using the power of the god of
death himself.
and funeral rites.
That's right.
They took the god of death's power to make the immortal cell. They corrupted that power. Again, corrupted in the sense that death is not something to be feared.
Right.
Death is not something to run away from. Death is a part of life and an important one, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And they corrupted this god's power and used it for the totally opposite purpose. And judgment was the result. It was the consequence of that sin.
Yeah.
Hyper Light Drifter is one of my favorite games of all time.
Yeah.
It's easily a top 10. It may be a top 5. Playing it again as we got ready for this podcast just reconfirmed literally everything I love about the game. I'm very, very excited to dive into it. There's a lot of stuff I learned this time that I hadn't known before. So it's just full of stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
This is your first time playing it.
My absolute first time, yeah.
And
I didn't even really know what to expect.
What is just the general one-sentence feeling after your first time?
I am ready. I'm ready to, gosh, I'm ready to make the most of my life. That's probably the best of it, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's basically
in so many different ways.
Yeah.
We're going to touch on different ways. I see people differently. I can interpret the world around me differently. I have different feelings towards, the Anubis, the god of death.
Yeah.
I have different feelings just in all sorts of ways. And I feel like this game is a great metaphor for facing your fears, which is, something everyone struggles with and does better and worse at different times. But I feel like this game has given me a really good, maybe, a good foundation, maybe.
Yeah.
To a springboard. We'll put it that way.
Yeah,
it gave me a really good springboard from which I can, reach higher than I could before, I suppose, and face my fears in a way that, not just could help me, but could actually help other people, which I wasn't expecting from this game. It's like a little 16-bit, pixel game. And of course, I know how deep these types of games can be. But a lot of times that depth is not well procured. It's not well delved into by the, creators of the games. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But this game went all the way down to the mithril. Like they went by the gold and they went all the way to the mythical, material underneath. Yeah. And they started mining that. And they were like, here you go. We found the Arkenstone, right?
Sweet.
Check it out. Just look at it. We're not going to tell you any words. We're not going to tell you what it is. Look at this and see how precious it is. That's actually what I feel about this game.
That's a great way of putting it. I was not sure I was expecting that. It's basically perfect. It basically wraps up almost exactly the way I feel too.
Yeah.
And so real quick, for those of you who are joining us who have not seen the show before, or you're maybe new to the channel, I want to quickly set an expectation for what this analysis is going to be, because this is the kind of game that tells you very, very little. There's basically no text in the game at all. So as far as working out, okay, what happened in this story? What was this civilization over here all about? And there's even a lot of names and things of characters we don't know
that are just kind of made up by the community, right? Like a name kind of shows up and gets debated and rises to the top, and everyone, before you know it, everyone's calling it what that name was. Things resonate. And what I love about the way that the creator kind of chose to go about this is that he, even to this day, does not reveal much about the real story behind the game and the different lands and all of that stuff. Like, he'll give a little bit here and there, but for the most part he doesn't, because the theme of this game is so applicable to your life that it's not super important what specifically this entire world building, scene kind of entails. Yeah. It's not as important. The story is extremely important. The themes are extremely important. But if you want to delve into this world as a world that you can maybe live in, like a Middle Earth kind of thing, and like, oh, this is cool, I'm going to figure everything out. This game isn't really for that. This game is something to be extracted and then applied to your life. And that's why not only is there a silent protagonist so that you kind of get to inhabit the protagonist and fill it with your thoughts, but it's a world, it's a world that you can almost like take to the real world and be like, this is the world, or this is a potential version of the real world, right? It's not, it's like it's a silent world.
Silent world,
it's a silent world. And you get to, fill it out with all of your stuff, which I did. Part that we're going to talk about a little bit later, that there's like there's a drunk homeless dude just kind of, pounding a few bottles. And I put on that man's face the face of a homeless man that I occasionally see over near the stores whenever I, kind of make my way. Having a silent protagonist is interesting. A lot of games have done this, but having silent everyone means that I am putting faces to all of, and pixel art once again, which is a highly just symbolic and suggestive medium that isn't overly detailed, that I am putting faces to these people that are real faces of people in the world around me, and the buildings and the world and everything. Even the color scheme being pink and turquoise is fascinating. At first I was like hot Miami, kind of like I got this 80s kind of vibe.
Yeah, 80s aesthetic.
And it felt that for sure, but also it kind of separates enough between the game and kind of like what pixel art does. It lowers the resolution with having such a simple color palette that enables me to kind of just project my world back onto it. I have not seen a game do it this well, and I think I'm realizing why. It's because pixel art's limitations lend so well to this kind of thing. They just, I don't think, have been exploited to this level, and I say exploited, it's a good thing in this case, to this level until this particular game. That is like, hey, we're going to take advantage of the bare minimum amount of stuff that people need to know, and they're going to flesh it out themselves.
Right.
So cool.
It's amazing.
So cool.
And so because of that, because it's a world that doesn't fill in its own details and do a lot of like lore and world building in a sort of a concrete way, this is the kind of discourse a lot of people have around this game. They go into exploring, okay, what happened here and who is this character? And, and that's a lot of the discourse I found about Hyper Light Drifter as we were doing research.
It's cool to do that lore stuff and to figure out what's going on in the world.
It's cool. It's very cool.
This game has a depth that goes well beyond that.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what our podcast is about. Our podcast is not centered in exploring lore and in like explaining in summary exactly all the details of the story.
Right.
It is more about extracting, okay, what are the creators trying to say with this story?
Yeah.
And in doing so, we begin each game that we analyze with diving into interviews or even like direct interviews that we will occasionally do with developers and trying to get into their heads a little bit and understand where they were coming from and why they were driven to make this thing.
That's the thing. It's less of a what and a who, where, when. It's more of a why.
Yes.
And that's what interests us the most.
Yeah. And so that's what this episode is going to be as far as an analysis. It's going to be all the things that you said. What is it that we can take that Alex Preston, who is the sort of director or lead developer and designer on the game, this kind of came from his heart, which is important to put it that way.
In more ways than one,
And so what is it that he's trying to communicate with me here? That's the core at what we're trying to get into with our channel and with this podcast. So let's talk a little bit about just what Hyper Light Drifter is, 1,000-foot view. So Hyper Light Drifter is an action role-playing game released by Studio Heart Machine. Again, that word heart.
Yes,
important.
Again.
It was in 2016 that it came out, and it pays homage to 8 and 16-bit era games. In particular, games like A Legend of Zelda: The Link to the Past.
I got huge Link to the Past vibes here.
Yeah, and then Diablo. Are two games that Alex Preston has said were really kind of the core. He wanted to combine the best elements of those two games.
Very nice.
So this comes from the vision of lead designer Alex Preston. It follows an unnamed drifter in a bleak world who suffers from a deadly illness, one he desperately seeks a cure for. While wandering, he's contacted by a godlike being taking the form of a jackal and is shown visions of what happened in the ancient history of this world. The jackal then guides the drifter on a journey to destroy a diamond-shaped artifact referred to as the Immortal Cell. a technology developed by ancient civilizations in pursuit of eternal life, but which transmogrified and gave birth to a dark being known as Judgment, the same being which is the source of the Drifter's terminal illness, and who is now corrupting the entire world. As he scours the land to the north, south, east, and west, fighting off hordes of enemies standing in his way, the Drifter learns the secrets of these ancient civilizations and what led to their downfall, all while collecting the modules needed to open the way to the Immortal Cell. Delving deep into the underground chambers of the world, the Drifter confronts and defeats Judgment, destroys the Immortal Cell, and brings about a new age for the survivors of the apocalypse to begin anew without the looming influence of this Immortal Cell. So, again, that's more the 1,000-foot view of what the story is, right? A lot of that,
it's a good summary.
I think it's fair to say, can be missed. Because a lot of this is, you have to read it. You have to read it in the symbolism. Yeah. You have to read it in basically these monoliths that you find. Yeah. They're kind of secrets in the world. There are a lot of secrets in this game. Yeah. But you have to actually decode them. They're not written in, English letters or any language for that matter.
And you have to decode them out of the game.
Yes.
You don't get a decoder in the game.
You don't have a key for this in the game. This is something the community came together and figured out. And so by combining all of that together, you can kind of get a sense for the summary I just gave. But there's a lot of this story that is open for interpretation and purposefully so.
Purposefully so.
In terms of the what, when, where.
Yeah.
But again, we're here to talk more about the why.
Absolutely.
So, in pursuit of that, I would like to lead off with talking a little bit about the development history of this game and about the creator, Alex Preston. So, again, this game is primarily the vision of the lead developer, Alex Preston, and Preston was born with a congenital heart disease, which he has lived with his entire life, and he's been in and out of hospital since he was a baby, basically, right? Wow. With an array of very serious health issues. In an interview with The Guardian, this article and the interview was conducted by Chris Priestman at The Guardian, Alex Preston said, "I've dealt with serious health issues since I was born. Congenital heart disease, to start. A plethora of digestive and immune system problems have left me hospitalized on numerous occasions, often near death. This gives me a certain perspective on life and plays into the stories I want to tell. The main character in Hyper Light Drifter suffers from a deadly illness, one he is desperately seeking a cure for. It haunts him endlessly. That's something I'm keenly familiar with." To add to this, he goes on to say in Rock, Paper, Shotgun, "I have a heart condition. I was born with it. I was also recently diagnosed with a genetic mutation that causes a lot of other issues. I just have things that happen all the time. I'm always in and out of hospitals. I can't live my life in a typical fashion that most people can. I have a very restricted and limited diet, for example. I'm limited in the physical activities that I can do. And I have been throughout my life. That's kind of what led me down the path of playing a lot of games and indulging in a lot of media. I had a lot of downtime, so I really absorbed all of that stuff, especially with games where it's this entire world you can escape to and become something else. You don't have to worry about stuff going on in your own life currently. Games have always provided a good way to push the boundaries of my mind and get out of my own body. I've always had bits of Hyper Light Drifter swirling around in my mind since I was a kid. This one's reared its head time after time, but it was only in the past year, I was hospitalized really early in the year, that I realized I needed to actually get something out. Before, I was very private about my work and what I was doing. I only shared it with close friends and didn't put anything in the public eye. But I'm tired of hoarding my work. It's time to make an effort to push forward regardless of health problems or whatever else. It goes into everything I do, really. My maladies have always been my art, especially in this game. The story revolves around an ailing drifter. He's coping with his own set of problems, but he's still managing to live his life and do his job, essentially. There's definitely some autobiographical elements in the story. Now, those were some long quotes, but I think they're really key at driving at what I think I pull from this game, even though I don't have the same physical conditions that Alex Preston has. I do have some very persistent mental conditions that have plagued me for my entire life. And that when I see judgment, this dark, slimy being chasing and corrupting someone from the inside, really speaks to me, but more on the mental side. And something that's constantly getting in the way of me living my life the way that I want to live it. And so I really connected with the game from that perspective. But I think this is something that can be applied universally. Hyper Light Drifter, when it comes down to it, is a very difficult video game. I wouldn't say it's like the most difficult video game out there, but this is something with, say, like the Rise of the Souls games that has become a more popular kind of thing to see. You see it more often. Games that are really, really challenging, like they used to be when we were growing up on the NES and stuff.
Basically every game was that, because they were based on the framework from the old arcades, which were
designed that way.
Hard.
So that you keep putting more quarters in
exactly.
there and they make more
game
money.
Over, more quarters, game over, more quarters.
But in this case, I think it's really key that the game is difficult, because it really plays into what I think Alex Preston is communicating. He had something in his mind, something that he wanted, I think way back there somewhere, to put out there into the world, but you know, things were getting in the way, whether it's his health, whether he's, you know, insecure about it or whatever it might be. And it wasn't until he had a hospital visit and realized, you know, maybe I could die at any time.
Right.
Do I want to go having not fulfilled this potential, this thing that's in my heart and in my mind that I want to do? And so the game being as difficult as it is, and some of those challenges you come up to, it feels like that. It feels like there's constantly this really, really, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like there's something working against you and you just can't pass this thing. But when you do, I love the animation where the drifter like flips his sword and just like throws it down triumphantly into the ground. This just exasperation, this relief, this almost like yell without there being like the sound there of triumph. Like, I did it. I overcame this thing. I pushed forward. That to feeling, me is really at the core of what this game is communicating. That feeling, not so much even a message that's written in some kind of poetic, you know, like
didactic,
words that communicate it. It's like just a feeling that you draw from everything that goes into the design, from the animation to the art style to the music, especially sound design. All of it just like comes together to like give you that feeling, and that's what I drew from it. So I felt like those particular quotes were like really important into understanding that. So the name of Preston's studio is Heart Machine, and it's derived from the same struggle that he has been forced to deal with all of his life, right? So the company name Heart Machine is inspired by that too. I had open heart surgery when I was about 1 year old. I had a couple holes in my heart. They had to patch those up. A couple years ago, I also had a pacemaker installed to help with electrical pathways. Heart issues wrecked that stuff. So that's where the name of the game studio comes from. So everything about the art he makes, like he said, comes from his struggle with his health. So the note I took here, the game serves in many ways as a metaphor for the struggle Preston has lived with throughout his life. The drifter is haunted by judgment, the dark being seen at the beginning of the game that overwhelms him and often comes in contact with. And it's a destiny that he can't seem to escape. So Preston envisioned Hyper Light Drifter in a way of telling a story that he could personally identify with. He says here in The Guardian again, the biggest component here is my ability to tell a story I can identify with, expressing something personal to a larger audience. So I feel more connected and have an outlet for the many emotions that crop up around life-altering issues. One thing that I noticed right away, even going back to like the first time I played this, I think I played it first in 2018.
Oh, yeah.
And this would have been right before the Switch release came out, which was like the special edition or whatever. So I played it on PC first, and then I ended up getting the Switch edition. But I could call it like right from the very beginning, that first cutscene when you see the giants, I was like, that's Nausicaa. That is Nausicaa inspired, 100%.
Yeah. We brought that up in the Nausicaa video, yeah.
Yeah, so we have done an episode analyzing Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind and also Princess Mononoke, and we occasionally do the Ghibli films. Yeah. We love them. We think they're amazing. We've seen basically all of them, at least the older ones.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I haven't seen like the newest stuff that they
I did.
out.
I saw the absolute newest one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fascinating. It was quite good.
Yeah. So he says here, Nausicaa is one of my favorite films of all time. It has that post-apocalyptic world where a society is still alive, still struggling in a really brutal world. That's very appealing to me. He also says, Miyazaki films have taught me that beautiful animation and design add life to a world.
Yeah. You know what? Miyazaki films are also famous for not having a ton of dialogue.
True.
There are lots of scenes. I actually, when I was learning Japanese, I was like, oh, dope. I'm going to get Totoro and I'm going to get all these, Ghibli movies because I know them so well and it's going to help me learn. And I would download MP3s of them and I'm listening to it and I'm like, I remember the shots for this, but no one's talking. And there would be minutes of like, there'll be times of maybe 10 minutes or longer where you're just hearing the music, you're hearing the trees, you're hearing the sound of things and, the wind and the grass and just maybe some background chatter as so-and-so's running to school or something like that. And no one's talking, right? Mm-hmm. But so much is conveyed in those moments. It turns out the Ghibli movies are not good to learn a language off of because you're not exposed to the language enough as you're doing it because there's not enough talking. And once again, with Hyper Light Drifter, it seems like he took that to the max. He's like, how much can we maximize this? And I never, until I tried using Ghibli, MP3s of Ghibli audio, basically, to just immerse myself in Japanese, I did not realize how little Japanese is actually spoken in those movies.
Yeah.
It is kind of astounding, the emotion and the feelings and the thoughts that are conveyed through that medium without the use of that much dialogue. It's there, but just not as much as you'd think.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I don't want to dive too much into the Miyazaki movies we've covered elsewhere. People can look those up if they want to watch them. But I noticed that the utility of words is really, really important in those films.
Right.
Like Princess Mononoke, he is off on the journey within like 10 minutes of the movie starting.
Right, yeah.
And there's so much that has to be communicated in that time. He has to be cursed. They have to know why. It's like all this stuff has to happen. And they communicate it with very, very little dialogue, but every word is important. Like every word. And I believe that's such an important part of becoming a mature and a really great writer is really putting vast importance on the utility of words and not saying too much. Right. You can say a lot with less, more or less. And this game says a lot with nothing.
It says a lot with nothing, which is really pushing the bounds of what I thought was possible.
So he speaks on this a little bit about why they chose to have no written words or dialogue. So his vision was to create a game that looked and felt like an SNES game. It was key that the game gave off that vibe of the Super Nintendo, right? So he says, the SNES had amazing, almost perfect games designed for limited environments, and I love the idea of those types of limitations, pushing those boundaries as hard as you can. That quote came from a Polygon interview. Alexa Ray Correa was the interviewer. He went on to say that the reason why the game features no dialogue is that he hoped to invoke those feelings, those memories, those vibes without having to say anything. And so he says, voice work is difficult to do.
Yes.
And I'm better at expressing things visually than I am trying to get voice actors to come in and do something. I think it takes away from the experience and from the audio experience as well, because the music is incredibly important in this game.
Yeah.
The silent protagonist and the silent worlds of the SNES era are really important. There's a certain feel you don't get now when there's voice work.
Yeah.
This is something we've talked about a lot.
Yes.
Particularly because in the past we've covered Final Fantasy quite a lot, and those worlds were silent up until the PS2 and Final Fantasy X.
Yeah.
And you can watch our Final Fantasy X podcast series if you'd like. We love that game, so this is not by any means meant to take away from its an astounding, amazing classic, one of the all-time great games of all time.
Great
we love it. But there is something different. Yeah. There is a different feel. I totally agree with this between a world that is silent, like the games we all grew up with when we were young. And then when all of a sudden voice work started coming, it's not just the fact that maybe the voice work was rough. It was
early on. It usually was.
Yeah, it was kind of still a new thing, and maybe they didn't have huge budgets, and maybe there weren't a lot of actors all that interested in doing voice work for games.
Or maybe the Japanese developers didn't pay enough attention to how the English actors were voicing. You know,
yes. So all of that aside, that's not really what I'm saying. Voice work is great, and there's a lot of like modern games that have amazing acting in them, and like 100% I think it's amazing to see how that has evolved and matured, and at this point how incredible some of the performances in games are. It's not to communicate one or the other is better, but simply to say there really is something different in the feel to it, right? It communicates itself in a really different way when there's no voice. When we're all up here, again, games we grew up with left a lot to the imagination, and you filled that in, and there was a lot of work being done on your own end. And so it's not to say that it's bad or wrong or like inferior to fill in those details and like try to make something that feels a lot more grounded and realistic to the world we live in. But it is saying that the use of abstraction in the past and the way that we used to, it's just a totally different feel. And he wanted to lean into that. And I think that it's one of the greatest strengths of the game is the fact that you are engaging with this thing and your mind is like constantly trying to like, well, what is this? What is this? You're seeing all these crazy images that really amazingly composed. And you come across a giant just like sitting there in the river or like climbing, like you know, dead on the side of a mountain. And you just have to ask, like, what happened here?
What happened? And anybody would ask that. It is the question that is evoked there, and of course, a community will get together and will put the pieces together and try to figure out what happened there. And that's important. It's equally as important for an individual to kind of interpret that themselves as well. You know, there's different levels of analysis here, and Alex just kind of says, have at it. You know, the community will create its own analysis, but individuals are still free to have their take on it as well.
And so the way that they go about communicating the story when it's necessary to do so, it's not all the time, but you'll come across characters that have an icon on their head. That means you can talk to them. And each of them will have a series of 3 images.
It's usually 3
pictures.
3s. Like, well, once again, any more than 3 is superfluous, right? Like 3 is kind of like a set rule. It's been set since well before Mario Brothers and defeating Bowser.
Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. I started here. This happened. Now I'm here.
That's it. Setting, conflict, resolution. Setting, conflict, resolution. And that's every single character. They say, here's where I was. This crazy thing happened. Here's where I am now. And then, or sometimes they don't say, here's where I am now. Sometimes they just say, hey, here's how that situation resolved. And then we just see where they are now. And sometimes that can be a terribly sad experience. Sometimes it can be very insightful. Sometimes it can be emotional in different ways. But often, like, there is the context of where they are now juxtaposed against this 3-act story that they're telling. And it tells you everything you need to know. Games don't need words. Did you know that?
If I didn't before, I do now.
Exactly.
I mean, we of course have, my eyesight's not great, Mr. Robot Overlord here as one of our patrons who joins us live for these recordings saying beginning, middle, end.
Beginning, middle, end.
This is kind of the whole concept behind the logo for our podcast, for our channel, Resonant Arc, right? It's the arc, the storytelling arc that you learn back in like English in high school, right? Your English high school English classes. But it's almost a triangular shape, a 3-sided shape, right? A beginning, middle, end. A exposition, climax, resolution. Like you're saying, there's 3 parts to telling a story, to getting across what you need to say. And every character in this game tells you what they need to in a series of 3 images. And it's so effective. I cannot get across how much I love this. This is so cool. For example, the drunk guy that you were referencing earlier, one of the few NPCs you can talk to in the game's central town. this one struck me really, really hard.
Me too.
From the first time I played the game.
And it's one of the early people you talk to, at least, if not among the first.
Yeah, exactly. You just see a guy there. You just walk up and you just see him drinking. There's bottles on the ground. Obviously, he's just...
Yeah. He's drowning in sorrow or something like that. Yeah.
And you go talk to him and you see hope. You see him seeing Central Town from a distance, and he's got like a little pack over his shoulder. Yeah. You see the hope of like a future there.
Yeah, everything's bright.
He's moving somewhere else. He's got an idea for his future that this is going to be the place. This is where I'm going to start anew, or where I can find prosperity, or whatever it is he's looking for. And the first thing that happens when he enters town, he gets surrounded,
he gets jumped,
beaten, and left for dead.
Yep.
I mean, just messed up, left in the street, everything he had stolen from him.
Yeah.
And now here he is, just drinking in an alley somewhere in the town.
He's lost his money. He's lost his hope. He's lost his spirit. He's lost his future. He's lost everything.
Yeah.
And so what he can do now is just kind of try to mask the pain. Yeah. Right. And as I mentioned earlier, there are, you know, as one goes throughout their day in a typical city, you will see homeless people, often doing something along the lines of drinking or something like that.
Masking the pain.
And it's so easy to just move on with your day and to just not pay any attention and to give them no mind. Maybe to assume, oh, they've always been like this, right? Because if I can't do anything about it, well, I'm going to make some excuse for why I think I can't do anything about it. But this particular game, it put an experience that doesn't have to be the complete, you know, true experience of the local homeless drunk person that I every now and then will see in my town. But it's probably something like that happened to him. And like you mentioned before, maybe it's not a physical thing. Maybe he had a mental break. Maybe it's something else. But the likelihood is he wasn't born that way. The likelihood is that he had parents who loved him and that he had a future that he hoped for. And here he is now, right? And it's a beginning, middle, end. It's just that exact kind of thing. And being able to look at a person and try to maybe at least imagine what their story could be is almost the same thing as the statement that everyone has something to learn from. Everyone has something to teach. Everyone is interesting in different ways. This game kind of, I still haven't, you know, seen this person since I played the game, but I'm already thinking about how I'm going to think next time I do see this person. I don't know what I can do about the person's situation, but at the very least, thinking differently about the people around you, especially people who you assume or who you've written off as just hopeless and a lost cause, and they never had anything going for them to begin with. Just thinking differently about people in general will hopefully, I think, have like an effect that rubs off on people and will actually start to impact the world in a better way, even if you don't know exactly how you can do anything in this moment, which I've struggled with. I don't think I can do much, but I can see him differently, which means that I'll think of him differently, which means that I will talk about him differently, which means that maybe every now and then I will act differently around him. And by virtue of me playing this game, maybe other people will notice that as well. You know, I mean, I don't know exactly what the future holds for him or for me, but I can at the very least say that thinking differently about people and each other and specific individuals can actually make the world a better place.
It really can.
And this game kind of like puts you in that spot where you can't help but imagine the local people that you know who have this similar problem, because the pixel art is so low resolution that you've got to imagine something, and you end up doing it with the stuff around you. Yeah. Brilliantly done. And I don't think a game has quite touched me that directly before.
Yeah.
I was shocked by it. And a week later, I'm still thinking about it. Like, man, I haven't even seen the guy yet, and I'm already thinking about him right now. Yeah. And all week I've been thinking about that guy. Yeah. And no one thinks about that guy. People ignore him.
There's the point. Right.
And I'm thinking about him, right?
Yeah.
Because of Alex, right?
Yeah, because of Alex.
It's crazy.
This way of doing like the dialogue between characters, the 3 images thing, is quite possibly my favorite thing about the game.
I think so too. Yeah.
They're so well done.
I wanted more of it. I wanted everyone I saw in town, or every person, to have something like that.
Yeah.
Like, how'd you get here? How'd you get here? Yeah. 3 images. Come on, Alex. You could have done 3 images for every character. Come on.
Yeah, I wanted to see more of it. We talked about this a little bit when we did our Dune episodes about Denis Villeneuve's feelings on dialogue and stuff.
That's right.
Which really align with this. So I'm going to leave it at that for now, but the Dune episodes will be coming live soon. So look forward to that.
Very good.
So Preston, when he decided, okay, I'm going to move forward, I'm going to push through all of my, my physical ailments and maladies, and I'm going to do this thing, right? I'm going to get it out there. He became committed to that. He recruited the help of programmer Bo Blythe, who had worked on Samurai Gun, and musician Disasterpiece. That's his moniker he goes by, right?
Yeah.
He almost makes the game too. Just the music alone
it's a very recognizable soundtrack.
Incredible.
The dissonant moments really created a mood for me that I don't know that is easy to achieve for most musicians.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
With how many notes that we have here and as much stuff as we have to get through, we're probably not going to have as much time as I would like to fully dive into the music. But I do want to at least say right from the start that what I think is so awesome about this, and this is becoming more common in games now, but the soundtrack is adaptive.
Oh,
and
yes,
what I mean by that is, it will build up depending contextually on where you're walking or what you're observing.
Yeah.
And I noticed this in several areas. There's one really early on when you first come over to the overlook that shows the town in the distance, and you just hear the music build, and crescendo right as you come up to that point and look over.
Yeah, that was wild. Yeah. And when you see the giant on the mountain in the north or something, I felt like there was something similar to that as well.
Yes.
The crescendo, those moments where you come to a peak and you see the background, so stunningly beautiful. It's among the best pixel art I've ever seen.
Yeah. One of my
the music helps that.
Favorite examples was, I can't remember which area this was. I think it was in the east area. There's a lot of places where you go underground, and so you're kind of fighting your way through tunnels and different things underneath.
Yeah.
And there's this very soft, palm-muted guitar. Boom, boom,
yes.
Boom, boom,
yeah.
boom, 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 boom. Just giving a very ominous but very subtle feeling like something's coming.
Yeah.
And the further you progress through this, some more instruments come in.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
More instruments come in. It adds and adds until all of a sudden you're in a fight and the whole soundscape is just filled. And then it goes back. and there's just this very dynamic feel that moves with you through the game.
That's very cool.
And the fact that is attached to literally where you're going and what you're doing. Everywhere in this game, I can't even fathom how much work and effort and thought and back and forth with the creative team to make that work. But it's so seamless. There's never a point where you see a tear in the seam, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that's an incredible accomplishment. And the music gives even very much a Blade Runner vibe to it, which is just really cool. That sort of, like you said, 80s vibe, 80s, right?
Yeah.
80s sort of sci-fi, cyberpunk vibe to it. It's amazing. So I couldn't get through an episode on this game without talking about how amazing the music is and how filled with atmosphere this game is in general.
Yeah.
Even if you don't understand what's happening around you, even if you're not able to follow the story and you're not putting it together, the vibe the game creates alone communicates something to you.
Yeah.
And I think that in and of itself makes the game worth playing, on top of course, being a very mechanically sound, very fun game, and a very challenging game too. So had to say that about Disasterpiece's work on this. He had also worked on Fez, which was another really popular indie game back in early 2010s. So they launched a Kickstarter to kind of get this thing going, and it had a goal of $27,000 that was exceeded in one day.
Yeah.
In one day, they were well over that, and they ended up with over $645,000.
Like 20 2,400%.
A lot.
Like more than they asked for. I wonder what this game would have been with just a smaller budget.
Yeah, right. Well, basically what this did was greatly expand what they were able to do with the concept.
And also greatly delay the game a little bit. But hey, it's
we
a
talk about
double-edged
sword. We talk about that a lot on this podcast.
Yes, but often the delay is fruitless, I would say. Often the delays end up, what did you really do? The game just got all muddy and they were way too big for what they had. And they stretched themselves too much. That doesn't seem the case here. They did delay the game because they expanded the scope, but they didn't overdo it in any way at all. And I would say that's probably thanks to just the pixel art nature of the game, that they didn't overdo it in what they added. They actually, in my opinion, well, I don't know what it was before, but they likely added the perfect amount because whatever the delays were, it didn't seem like there were any hurdles that they couldn't overcome within the game itself. It's a very polished, very complete game, it seems.
I think anybody who has worked on games or has, had a career in the industry on, especially in the modern era where game development is a long process now, much longer than it used to be.
Yeah.
But they will tell you something similar, which is it's very tempting to keep adding ideas as the game is progressing. Because, and I mean, this is true not even just of games, right? Like, so I've been writing a fantasy novel for going on 20 years now. And had I released it in its very first original form,
it would have been dope.
I wouldn't have been happy with it as a 37-year-old man.
Yes,
I would have thought it was sweet as a 15-year-old kid when I completed that and gave it to my teacher in sophomore English class. This is a dope story. But that reflected who I was at the time. And the danger with long development times or with writing novels over decades is that you change as a person.
As a person, that's true.
And you're constantly encountering things that you're observing in your everyday life that give you new ideas and that evolve you as a person. So what was important to you 3 years ago is not as important as what's important to you now.
Yes.
And so these ideas are like, oh, this has got to go in there. I've got to say this. This is important.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like the longer the dev cycle is, the more ideas you try to work into there, actually, the muddier, the less clear, the less focused it becomes.
I've noticed that, yeah.
And so that can be the danger of a huge success like this.
Right.
Oh my gosh, I can do so much more with it. That means more work. That means longer development time. That means in 2 years, I don't like this idea anymore. I want to do this now.
That's right.
And then the whole thing is changing so much that it doesn't resemble the original thing anymore, or just falls apart.
Right.
My novel, as it stands today, is basically nothing like what it was. It's a totally different book.
I've always been saying that you should just publish both at this point because
they're different stories.
They're totally different books.
Totally different stories. And so you have to watch out for that. I think that what your instinct should be, or I guess you should fight your instinct and do instead the total opposite of that, which is cut ideas.
Yes, that's
not add them.
Quality over quantity.
Right, exactly. So anyway, there were some delays with this game for sure, but a lot of that had to do with his health.
I would say that I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't think a single person is upset by the delay unless somebody happened to not live long enough to play it after having donated. Other than those people, if you lived long enough to get this game, I can't imagine a single person would have been upset that it was delayed 2 years for what we got.
Well, and part of the larger workload that comes with, okay, we can expand this is we don't just do a PC release, we do a console release, and we do on every platform. Right, and so like they're trying to put it out on everything. And I mean, there's a big development, both cost for manpower and just time that goes into just porting a game from this platform to this one. It sounds
easy.
It's not.
It's not.
At all.
It's not. And of course, they have ported Hyper Light Drifter later, but he didn't try to do that right away. Yeah. It was years later, and the game was already successful and stood on its own. Then it was like, hey, let's put this out elsewhere.
They get it out their PC release, but then they want to bring it to PlayStation, Xbox. But then it's like, okay, what about Wii U and PS Vita? Well, that's taking so long that those platforms become irrelevant.
Right, after
so
too long.
now it ends up becoming the Switch and iOS and Android version, right? But that was a whole other development studio kind of stepped in after Alex Preston said, hey, man, like I can't with my health and like everything going on. I have to cancel these ports to Wii U and Vita and everything. And so this other developer came in. I have their name here. Just give me just a second. Abbey Light. Oh. Abbey Light Studios ended up stepping in and helping bring the game to the mobile platforms and to the Switch.
Cool.
So it was because of their...
Wonder how this game plays on mobile.
That's a great question. I can't imagine it's good. However, you can connect controllers to phones via Bluetooth these days.
Yeah.
I actually have one. I take it like on long flights and things where you could just, it has like a little thing that holds the phone up sideways, and then you just hold the controller, and it's just basically an Xbox controller, and it's via Bluetooth. You just play games that way. So I do that one of those. From time to time. I'm sure it would play flawlessly if you had something like that. Okay. So originally the game was set for sorry, I'll start that over. Originally the game was set for release in 2014, but was delayed to 2016. So it was a 2-year delay due to the expanded scope of the game. Preston's perfectionistic oversight of the project, as well as his constant health issues, were, some of the causes for that. He also had a lot of help from other smaller developers working in the LA area. I really liked this part of the story. So he ended up founding a little community space known as Glitch City, just like a place where he and his friends and other indie developers could come and just bounce ideas off of each other and like help each other with like places they were stuck in their own development. He says about this, a small group of us were all tired of working in our bedrooms or living rooms or garages and knew we had a lot of common knowledge and enjoyed each other's company. So why not find a place where we could all work together? No longer lonely. We can consult one with another, provide support in many ways, and build a larger community to host positive events and foster other work we're fascinated by. That also came from The Guardian, that interview with The Guardian. So that's what ended up helping them get through it, right? They sort of brought a larger community of indie developers together and helped each other out with the stuff that was going on. They created a common space where they would all go work together. Glitch City.
Glitch City.
That was really cool. That's pretty much all my notes that I felt was necessary to dive in to get kind of at the core theme of the game as far as development history. Now there's a lot of stuff to dive into as far as the game itself. I have just pages and pages of notes. But I want to kind of reiterate this point about the monoliths. So actually, why don't I do this first? I'll explain a little bit about how the game is designed. So essentially, and this will very much be reminiscent, and you'll see the inspirations from Zelda. Zelda is very much designed this way.
I felt it so heavily,
Yeah. So you kind of have like areas on the map in the 4 cardinal directions. To the north, the south, the east, and the west. And these larger areas are filled with little secrets that you can find and monoliths that you can discover that, again, when you decode them, sort of give you more information about the story. Combat encounters, just a lot of exploration in general. There's so many things you can miss. And that was one of the things I enjoyed the most about my second playthrough, back probably in 2018 when I first played the game, was figuring out like how to find how to find all those little invisible bridges that lead to those places and getting the keys. So keys are a big one. So there are certain areas you can only access if you have the right number of keys to get into them. And those usually lead to rewards like a new set, like a new robe, or like the little robot dude that hovers around with you, right? So like different sets that the character can wear. Also, the gear bits that you kind of combine into what becomes your currency to upgrade your character's powers. So the more of those you find, the more you'll be able to upgrade sword abilities or get more ammunition for the guns that you pick up. My favorites are the ones that are tied to the drifters, like dodging abilities, right? So you have like a dodge, but you can upgrade to where you can then dodge. And if you're doing it with the right timing, you can almost infinitely dodge around, right? But then in conjunction with that, you can get powers that will like allow you to absorb projectiles if they're shot at you while you're dodging through them. Or even reflect them back, or do damage to enemies as you are moving through them. You can sort of do like an attack,
a dash,
while you're dashing.
Yeah. A lot of this reminds me of Pikachu in Smash Brothers.
Oh, there you go.
Just the up B, and then you can.
So as you're exploring these areas, a lot of times it's trying to find those items, whether it's a monolith for story stuff, whether it's gear bits to upgrade your character, or whether it's keys to access areas where you can get new gear and like just different. I guess not really gear. It's more like a set. Again, something the character wears. Though those do provide different abilities as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of just scouring the areas looking for stuff. But in each area, you are meant to find these pink modules, they're called. And if you get 4 of them, that gives you access to that area's boss. But there are 8 modules total in each area.
Fill it up twice.
There's so essentially you have like the diamond shape that you create, but then there's almost a square outside of that that you can then finish to get all of the modules. And then there are 16 total monoliths that can be found. So a lot of secrets. Yeah. And beyond that, there's all the little gear bits and just like all the keys. There's a lot of secrets in the game. So a lot of it is, like I said, scouring the areas, looking for stuff. But then each area has kind of their main boss at the end. And of course you can, there's fast travel where you can warp back to the center of town and then go like upgrade and then go back to exploring again. But in a lot of ways, the world map, you look at that and you get very much a Link to the Past feel to it, right?
Yeah,
with its different areas. A lot of times in Zelda games, let's say like Majora's Mask, for instance, you have your desert zone, and then you have your ice or like mountainous zone or something like that. The forest zone. Yeah. And this is kind of like that. It's 4 cardinal directions. You have the mountainous zone to the north. You have like the water zone to the east. Then you have like the forest zone to the west, and then the wastes, or what would be kind of like a desert zone to the south. And so that's kind of how the game works. So you unlock these modules, and if you do that in each of the 4 areas, then there's an area right in the center of the central town that goes down to where the final boss is.
Yeah.
So you have to unlock enough modules from each of the 4 zones. I guess it would be 4 per zone to be able to access that final boss and then go and beat the game. So that's kind of the general design of the game.
And what I love about the design is that there is this thing that our character is looking for, right? Which is the diamond of light, whatever it is called.
It's called the Immortal
Cell. Yeah. Which can mean 2 things, actually, the more I think about it. Is this some type of biological cell, or is this a fuel cell? Now, the word immortal makes me think this is biological. This is something that can make humans live forever. But there's also the possibility that it's referring to a fuel cell that never depletes, right? So it's just infinite energy, right?
Infinite energy,
And honestly, those 2 are kind of interchangeable in terms of just technology, because what would we use infinite energy for? Well, to try to live forever, because that's what humans have been in pursuit of for thousands of years. And so infinite energy equals infinite life, something like that. Or possibly even, well, maybe vice versa as well. Because if you solve immortality, then there's an energy problem there as well.
Right.
But the fact that throughout the game, we're looking for this thing, we keep having flashbacks to that moment where the drifter is reaching towards this diamond, right? But then the blackness kind of shows up and cuts him out. And then, you're left wherever. You wake up somewhere later and there's crows around you trying to eat your body because they think you're dead. And maybe you are, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But we're looking for this light diamond. And what we do on the game, right, is that you're collecting those things that kind of fill out the diamond in each quarter. But also the fact that you're collecting these things in each quarter and you're going in this basically 4 cardinal direction, but it's a diamond shape, that the whole world is shaped like a diamond. And you're kind of going to the points of the diamond, right? Which is the 4 cardinal directions. And then you come back to the point, the middle, the heart of the diamond, right? And that's where you kind of get there. That's where you ultimately, have an opportunity to maybe confront the diamond itself, right? And our character is looking for something the whole time. And it's pretty clear that our character wants that. It's like, that thing is what's going to help me in my current situation. But in the pursuit of the diamond, and as we replicate the shape of the diamond on the larger world, we kind of find it in a different way. We found it in the embodying of it, as opposed to the thing itself that we need to grab so that we can have infinite power. We actually kind of, in traversing that shape and in bringing the macro scale diamond or the micro scale diamond to the macro level of just the whole world, we kind of do the opposite of what was being done in that very intro cutscene, which is there's the 4 points, there's the diamond, and there's something on each of the 4 points, and it basically just massacres everyone and kills like the whole town, right? And that's the very intro. If you don't, press start, if you don't do anything, you see this whole movie. It's just a couple of minutes long, but it's really good. But what we do is we go back to those points and we basically gather all of the stuff from those points and then come back to the middle, but then we don't like do the thing, right? Like we found the real diamond was the friends we made along the way is more or less what I'm trying to say. The real diamond was the fact that we already made the diamond and we found that the actual point is to not do that, right? We end up destroying it towards the end of the game, right? But the fact that we're tracing that shape, and just as I try to read this game symbolically, there's something important there. There's a difference. It's like we have a similar goal. Like technology isn't bad. Like we don't just hate technology. Oh no, let's go back to everything. But it's like we're reclaiming what was lost on all of those 4 places, and then we're trying to recreate that original situation that killed everyone, except do the right thing this time. So we trace around the boundaries, and then we save everyone instead of killing everyone, in a manner of speaking. I actually don't know. It's probably possible that some people do die because we destroy the power source. Although I don't think it was in use anymore, right?
No.
It was being used to preserve.
At this point,
these like giant,
Judgment was the one using it.
Because it was kind of, there's a shadow to that whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that's why it's underground, right?
Right.
And that's where the shadow sleeps. But apparently this thing had been created by the powerful sea otters and had been kind of sealed away. I don't think it was being used anymore.
Right.
But it was still there with the hope that one day it would be used.
Right.
Let me get a name up here. I'm going to say this name. This is the name of what should be considered one of the most important humans to ever live.
Okay.
Right?
This is
intense. The name is Henrietta Lacks.
Never heard of her.
You've never heard of Henrietta Lacks?
No.
Henrietta Lacks is the origin of what is called the HeLa cell, H-E-L-A cell. Well, it's named after her, Henrietta Lacks, H-E-L-A. This is the first ever human cell discovered to be immortal, to duplicate, to replicate
immortal
itself.
Cell.
A real immortal cell.
No way.
This cell it was discovered in 1951, and Henrietta was actually a cancer patient. And she ended up dying that year. But the doctors that took a biopsy in order to do some research on it and to try to treat her, this was a long time ago. It was not a
Is this the real life albedo, Henrietta?
Oh, jeez. Oh, my gosh. Well, I think that the cell must have the ultimate telomerase within it.
That's what I'm getting at.
Because how else would this be possible?
If you haven't seen our Xenosaga coverage, that's what I'm referencing. There's a lot of this basically in that character, but go on.
So this game is dubbed by scientists, and you can find this information all over the place. It's on, where am I here? The NIH.gov has a whole page about this. Johns Hopkins University, their medical school, has a whole, write-up about this. Scientists have called this the Immortal cell line. These are HeLa cells. There are, I would guess, billions, maybe trillions of these cells in existence now because that single cell has replicated so many times. But it all originates from that original cell. And these cells have been used in all kinds of things. These cells are used in many modern vaccines. These cells are used in cancer research. These cells have been used in life extension possibilities, I'm sure, and other fields of, growing like biological interest of how is this possible? Now, we have discovered immortal cells in certain very simple organisms where it's like death, they didn't learn about death yet, I guess, and how they can evolve. So they're still very simple and they didn't really evolve much because in order to evolve, there needs to be pressure and death and change and all that stuff. Right. These cells are very simple, but for human cells to be discovered, to be immortal, is a very large discovery. The person's name is Henrietta Lacks, and I encourage everybody to look into this because, first off, it doesn't sound true. but it is. Second off, Hyper Light Drifter talks about an immortal cell and the search for an immortal cell. And there's actually a big ethical conundrum about the use of these cells today within modern science. There's a few people who aren't stoked that they're in things like vaccines, for one example. But another one is she never gave her permission for her biology to be used like this. Yeah. Like it is wild. And there are people related to her that are still alive today who have no compensation for this person. Do you know how much money has been made from this? Now, I'm not accusing anyone of malpractice necessarily. This happened a very long time ago. I don't know what the motives were of the people who did this. And I would say that good has come from these cells. These cells have been able to reveal a lot of important things, and that there is good stuff you can point to that has come from these cells. But the use of them without compensating the family to whom these cells belong, it's their DNA too, right? Yeah, right. Like they're all sharing it together. I guess the idea is that if you just wait long enough, then everyone will be so far removed that it just won't matter. But this is one of the biggest biological discoveries of the last 100 years. Would be this immortal cell line, and I'm highlighting those words on purpose for the purposes of this game. It is possible that one day the immortal cell line from Henrietta Lacks will lead to immortal humans, and maybe someone might have to go destroy the cell, is all I'm saying. Actually, I don't know if I want to go that far. Sorry to all you scientists out there. I don't know. This is the thing. It's fun. It's interesting in a game that has a theme to convey to people, saying, hey, let's think twice before doing this stuff. But once you're actually there, once you actually have artificial general intelligence or something close to it at the moment, or once you actually have immortal human cells, we just haven't figured out how to engineer them or how to use them properly, you destroy that cell, a lot of people die. And you got an ethical conundrum in the other way now, based on, do you really know so much that you're going to destroy the cell for everybody? I get it that you may not like it, but what about everybody? And it seems like in this game, he puts the knife to the cell for everybody, right? And that the result of that is white shores and beyond, a fair green country under a swift sunrise, right? Beauty beyond that he will not get to experience, the drifter, but that is the future. That is where this leads. And gosh, it's weirder when you bring it into modern actual times right now. But this is a thing that is it's on its way, and there is an immortal cell in existence today.
So two things to kind of dovetail off of that. First of all, in the exploration, you come across these monoliths. Like I said, there's 16 of them. And I'll put this on the screen, but they're all written in these symbols. And those symbols correlate to 2 letters in the English alphabet.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, the way that works. Yeah.
So
you kind of have to, there's still some guesswork.
There's still some guesswork. Yeah, even after you kind of know what it is.
Yeah.
And so each zone has 4 of them for a total of 16. So if we were to decode them, I'll put these all on the screen. In the North Zone, which is the divine path where the birds live, and the Hierophant, the cult leader, is sort of the boss there, right? The first one says transcendence, faith, immortality. It could also say in mortality.
And
either
Alex
one of these works.
Has not clarified this, has he?
So that's really interesting. You can read that both ways. Either transcendence, faith, immortality, or transcendence, faith, in mortality.
Yeah. And you know what's fun? I really like that. I like that we're bringing this up too, because there were actually 2 like cults up in the North. Like there was an original cult of the bird people, and there's that guy we talked to where he's like taking care of all the eggs, and then some people break in and burn the whole place down. So he goes and saves the eggs, right? Yeah. But they were a religious people to begin with beforehand, right? And they were overthrown by another religious cult, like a different cult that...
Yeah, it could be that, or maybe it could just be a radical leader who rose through that and sort of tried to take it over.
A different take of the same religion, something like that.
Maybe it could be that.
Entirely possible, but the idea is that this exact monolith could have been from either cult, from either one, because either they were saying, let us have peace with our mortality, or the modern Hierophant was saying, let us have faith in the immortality of our pursuit, right? Of the eventual gain. And That was brilliant. It's brilliant to have a decoding where that can be 2 letters and then to have a dual meaning there that can actually work within the world within either side.
Right.
Very, very
love
cool.
that. The second one says...
what I'm saying is I don't think there's one answer to that.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's both.
I agree. Number 2 says rifts, crafted, dangerous, potential. Not as much to work with that. Number 3, a foundation for faith and violence.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
I'm not sure if I'm pulling exactly what that refers to, but that's just something really evocative about that.
Very evocative.
A foundation for
contrast.
faith and violence.
Yes.
Crazy.
No, I would guess that that's maybe more
Number 4,
modern.
A loss of self, a narrow path traveled. And so you move into, let's go into the south zone. You get overwhelming wonders and power. Now, this is the zone where they were building the giants that we see, sort of the dead giants, right?
Yeah, that's
They
right.
were sort of constructing them underground in the south zone. So overwhelming wonders and power. Desperate hunger for progress. That's the second one. Distortion of life, devouring body, right? So we have overwhelming wonders and power, like the capability, the technology advances. Desperate hunger for progress. So this is almost maybe a little bit of a Jurassic Park situation, another movie we've talked about on this podcast.
I was going to say this world needed an Ian Malcolm. And our world needs an Ian Malcolm.
Yeah. The pursuit of progress, there's a desperate hunger for that. And that ends up being a priority over should we do this,
Should
right?
we do this?
A distortion of life, devouring body, the first victim of the invasion.
I'm realizing this, by the way, that these are stories as well.
Yes.
Each of these are going in stories.
Yes, they are.
In which case, the North Zone number 1 probably is immortality, not immortality.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because it's the pursuit, it's the goal, and then what happened when we tried to achieve that goal? Not what we thought would happen.
Right.
It's like when Einstein discovers the theory of relativity, and then it's like, oh, great. And then 4, 5, 10 years later, it's nuclear bombs. And he's like, that's not where I thought this was going.
Right.
So each of these starts off with an ideal and ends up with a disaster.
Yes. And this really ties into very much something I want to touch on with each of the zones, but I'll get to that after I've read the rest of these. So in the East Zone, an isolated people, fearful and obsessed, offering of a great cleansing flame. So they have what's called the hyperlight in the East Zone, that pink fire that you see all over the place, right? A poisoned, maddened homeland, fragile balance scorched, undone. And then in the West Zone where they're kind of, so each zone kind of has, well, I think it's best worded in the South Zone monoliths. Overwhelming wonders and power. There is some kind of source of power or some resource or something that is like native to that part of the land that they have harnessed. And that leads to distortion of life or a desperate hunger for progress or an isolated people fearful and obsessed, right? So this boon that they had in their civilization that caused their rise created a people that were then hoarding it or obsessed with it or fearful of losing it or desperate to take the progress further.
Right.
Which then led to all of the disasters that happened in each. So then you go to the West Zone, they had that green crystal substance, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I think, called hard light. And it's what like
that's pretty cool.
It's what the drifter's weapon, his sword, is made from. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
And all of them have weapons made from this hard light, right? Hardened light. Precious moments captured by crystal. A stillness of mind, skill honed, sharp. Midnight looming, trapped by desperation to remain. Now that last line is really interesting.
It means
desperation
you're trapping
to remain
yourself.
You want to remain immortal. You want to live forever.
And you become trapped by that.
By putting yourself into the crystal stasis. You see so many characters trapped in that stuff,
that's right.
including the boss of the area that you fight at the end.
It's like, you're not dead. Congrats. You're immortal. But you got nothing.
Have to stay in this crystallized
They say
form.
You have it all, but it cost you everything. Right. And that's the embodiment of it right here.
Right.
They got what they wanted.
So we're kind of seeing a common theme between all these. Now, if you visit the library, now there's this character, the librarian, who sort of appears briefly after each monolith you find. You kind of see this character who was also, or it has been confirmed, contracted the same disease that the judgment, boss that gave. But instead of pursuing, the same things that say the Guardian, the other drifter that saves our drifter, or that we're pursuing, which is the immortal cell, this librarian who was also a drifter pursued knowledge, and then recording that knowledge and making sure that somebody else could understand what happened here, right? So you go to the library where you get this message when it all kind of comes together. Harnessing a great wellspring, a perfect immortal cell was crafted to be imbued within all sentient life. A noble goal, though such a power terrified others and brought ruin as its purpose was transmogrified.
Transmogrified.
Yeah. And that's where judgment came from, in the transmogrification of that immortal cell. The abhorrent cell still festers deep in the chambers of the world. So and that you kind of see that in the beginning or the intro movie, right? You have, again, that diamond shape, and you have an icon representing each sort of like race that lives in each of these four areas. And each one kind of lights up with the music. And then they come into the center, and you see the jackal there in the center.
Yeah.
So they had these ambitions for immortality.
Yeah.
And they used the power of the jackal. Well, just for the purposes of this analysis, we're going to call this Anubis moving forward. We're going to talk about Anubis in a minute.
Yes.
They harness the power of this Anubis, godlike jackal being, to create the immortal cell. But something goes wrong. And whether that's over-ambition on the parts of these civilizations, or fear, or whatever was driving it, it resulted in the corruption of this immortal cell and the birth of judgment, which not only gave it control of a lot of their technology. My reading of it is that judgment is the one that unleashed the giants.
Oh, really?
Right? Because with the power, you like you said, it's probably not just saying that, oh, an immortal cell, this is simply like something that would give organic beings immortality, but like an infinite energy source.
Yeah.
It now has control of the infinite energy source that was being used by the civilizations. Therefore, it has control of their technology. Yeah. Therefore, in the South, where they're developing these giants, he can unleash them and like take them
what's wild?
To war against the other races.
There's a way to look at this, which is that each side had a piece, right?
Yeah.
And they all kind of came together to create this thing, right?
Yeah.
Which means that they were exchanging ideas, at least to some degree. Many of these groups are very closed off. They're like, we don't want to talk to anyone. I think that's maybe a modern thing, or they always were that way, but they were willing to give it up for, hey, this ultimate power. One of the big questions is, if anybody ever got this ultimate power, this infinite power source, what would happen is probably exactly what happened in this game, which is fear, literally fear of death, starts to control the power. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know that these races all trust each other 100%, right? It's like, hey, great, we built this cool thing. This thing's awesome. I hope they don't use it against me, though. I mean, you wouldn't ever do that, right? Of course you wouldn't do that. And I would never do it to you either. Of course I wouldn't. But like, really, but what about these guys, though? These bird people, aren't they kind of weird, right? Yeah. Maybe like, let's form a coalition of like the ground people, and let's like let the bird people kind of deal on their own. And my point is that eventually the fear that someone was going to take it and use it against them led to them trying to take it and use it against everyone else. It's almost like a preemptive thing. Oh, I better hit them before they hit me. Yeah. There's this nuclear power. There's this huge power source. It's incredible. We can't what ends up happening is the fear of losing it, or the fear of someone else turning it against you, starts to drive the thing itself.
Yes.
Right?
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
So literally the spirit of fear of death, which is basically personified by this judgment character, is what actually, this is true. This is what happens. It ends up driving. It ends up in the driver's seat.
Yes.
And that's how, like, Albert Einstein created, unbeknownst to him, nuclear bombs, right?
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, once it got in the hands of people who were afraid of everyone else and mistrustful, fear was in the driver's seat. And it was like, nuclear bombs. This becomes a way to defend ourselves and to kill like as many people as possible with one bomb. And that was never the intention to begin with.
Yes.
And so when fear of death is in the driver's seat, this is exactly what happens.
I really want to drive home that I believe this is another central theme to this game, this fear of death.
Yeah.
Because now this is a brilliant launching off point or transition to Anubis.
Oh, very good.
Do you want to take Anubis?
I would love to. I would love to.
It.
First off, when you first learned about Anubis, like 6th grade or whenever you learned about it, what was your opinion of this god? Was this a good guy or a bad guy?
Well, I would have probably viewed it similarly to like Hades or something like that, right?
Yeah,
this is like the Satan of this
exactly
this mythology or whatever. And that's not the way those ancient cultures looked at them.
No, the angel, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. In fact, I've even kind of I think even within a work like Dante's Inferno, that Virgil in Dante's Inferno is the angel of death. He leads Dante down all the way down into the Inferno, and then he guides him back out into Mount Purgatory later on. But Virgil is essentially something along the lines of the angel of death. He is fulfilling the part of Anubis. It's not Satan. Satan, like the idea of Anubis, this game has actually kind of opened my eyes here because I've understood Anubis better, but it's hard to put away those childish notions you develop when you're a kid, that the god of death must be Satan, or the god of death must be, but these gods were revered, right? Anubis was plastered all over the walls of the tombs of the pharaohs, like they didn't hate this guy. This was a god that was important to them, that was going to help them, right?
Yeah.
It takes a long time to kind of undo that. And of course, the idea of a jackal, it's not exactly the most pleasant pleasant of animals in the world, or something along the lines of a hyena or something like that. Like, it's something you typically want to avoid. But they use these images on purpose. And the idea that the god of death was not there to just preside over you and laugh at you in your suffering, but was there to actually guide you through a landscape, which is the world after you die, right? That's powerful. It's basically what shows up in a movie like Jacob's Ladder, which once again, we're referencing all sorts of things that we've done in the past.
Talked about before.
And things, maybe certain movies or games that we don't necessarily want to spoil the ending for, but people, please watch it, especially if you like this game. And then, maybe you can check out our review of it so that you can kind of see the symbolism here and how it works. But the idea that Anubis is the god of death is an ancient Egyptian one. So you've got the gods, and of course they'll draw the gods with different heads of animals. Like Horus had an eagle. There are different animal representations of the gods. Well, Anubis was a jackal, and a jackal is, well, it's basically what you see in this game here as the little dog. So after our first encounter with the judgment, I think it's after our first encounter, when we see those pillars rise. It might have been before, though. It could have been at the end of the cutscene that we see at the beginning. It's
towards the end of the cutscene, but it's after. Well, actually, now I'm getting it mixed up a little bit. It's right,
because they show it twice.
It's after you see the giants, and I think he leads you into the pillar and then to the immortal cell. And then as you're reaching for the immortal cell, that's when judgment grabs you.
But it's after we're coughing up blood, right?
Yes. So that happens pretty much right at the beginning where judgment first shows up, and he tries to fight it and he can't kill it. Right?
Yeah. And then the jackal is here and says, here we go. Let us go into this tower. Follow me. And this is so funny because dogs will follow their owners. But at what point is the dog the one being followed, right? Well, if it's going to help you, if it's going to go get help, then you'll follow the dog. But this is a bit of a flipping of the typical roles, right? So what I really like about Anubis guiding us through this is that it gives us some hint of like, are we alive or not, right? But being mortal itself is being subject to the fate of death from the beginning, from the moment you're born, right? That death isn't something that just happens once in your life. Death is a continual process that has always taken place in your mind, in your cells, through all different, biological functions, that you're constantly being reborn, dying and being reborn, right? And so for Anubis to show up here doesn't necessarily mean that the Drifter has to be dead. There's probably theories that he's dead the whole time. I don't know what to make of those. But I will say that at the very least, his knowledge of his own mortality, which comes after seeing your own blood, this is programmed into us. like even as a little kid, like once you see blood and you know that's your blood, like deathly fear comes over you, and just like you could be this much blood, and as a kid you don't know how much blood you have, you don't know how much you can lose before it's too much. It's like a drop of blood is too much, get that blood back in, stop it, no. But once you see your own blood and you're confronted with the possibility of your own mortality, it's almost like the process of death is beginning right there, especially in your mind. And you need a guide. You need help, right? Because we are programmed to just survive at all costs.
Yes.
We are so programmed for that. But the gods, especially the ancient gods, can so easily, Carl Jung was brilliant at this, but they can be so easily maybe fit into psychological functions that these things were filling a long time ago. And that, nowadays we don't have the gods anymore, but now how are we to deal with these psychological realities, such as you're going to die, right? And we've kind of thrown out the baby with the bathwater in our modern pursuit of abandoning the old gods and then just kind of living life through technology and whatever artificial means that we can use to prolong our life as long as possible. But Carl Jung was brilliant at showing that, like, no, these old gods were very helpful, and they can still be helpful today if only you would accept them in whatever minimal way you can. Maybe you have a hard time believing them now. Fine. These things will help you psychologically, and they will really prove to help you in the world as well. And he would say that having a guide, that once you are confronted with your own mortality, that these gods would be able to guide you in a way to actually kind of help to make peace with yourself and to help kind of through the, your unconscious mind to kind of maybe integrate with your true, who you truly are. Carl Jung said that the first half of your life was spent building a strong ego, and the second half of your life was learning to let go of it. Yep. Right? And it's a brilliant statement there, but we have a hard time with that second half part. And that's where I think this mythological language, which is clearly being drawn upon by Alex Preston, I say clearly, 99% sure that's supposed to be Anubis, that this was done intentionally, but I don't think he's confirmed it, has he?
I'm not sure how much he has chosen to really speak on confirming theories about the game.
It's the right choice. It
would be absurd to think that this was not thought through and chosen on purpose.
I think so.
Yeah.
But mythological language is the right language with which to confront things like this. And that's why it's no coincidence that Alex would go to something like this. Somebody who has confronted death many times throughout his life is like, look, you can fight against it your whole life, or you can surrender and give yourself up to whatever fate has in store for you anyways, and try to do the best you can in your life, right? And part of that is allowing Anubis to guide you to wherever you can get to a point in your life where you're okay with dying, right? Because I think, especially if you're going to read it psychologically, part of the issue of death is just the non-acceptance of it, right? That whatever happens in your brain after you die, and as the connections start to kind of, dull and your mind kind of sinks into maybe this death dream, is that the likelihood of you just denying that you're actually dead is so probable that your brain, that there will have to be ways of dealing with it, right? And the easier way that you can pass from now into after death is to accept these things, right? And mythological language is the best way to convey that. So however that happens, I feel like Alex may have maybe confronted these things before. Yeah. And he's saying, don't fight it, right? When the jackal shows up, don't run away, right? Follow it. And it will help you. Even if you're not dead yet, it will help you. It'll guide you to a place where when you die, you will be able to accept it. Yeah. And a lot of that is like with the Bardo Thodol in, what was it? The Bardo. It's an old, Tibetan manuscript, right? And it has all of this stuff in it. But I think, and Carl Jung would probably agree with this, that the point of it is to initiate people into what actually probably happens when your brain starts to shut off, and to really help you pass peacefully. So
yeah, I think that death is clearly something that has been on Alex Preston's mind. Yeah, from a very young age and throughout his life. And this is a recurring theme on our channel. We cover a lot of stuff that deals with the greatest fear that everyone is born with, which is death.
Death, yeah.
And the imminent nature of it, the inescapable nature of it. And so there's clearly something going on here. And I want to put it this way, because we have had wonderful guests on our show, like Keith Comito, who is the president of Lifespan.io, and they are working to expand human life. And there are a lot of people who have pushed against us on some of our thoughts on this, who think it's a good pursuit to extend or maybe even create eternal life at some point. And my point today is not to contend with that in any way. And I think Keith and we have come to an agreement on the central point of this, which is what should not be driving you in your life is the fear of death. There
you go, yeah. It should be love and joy instead of fear and pain, yeah.
And clearly it was fear of death that drove these civilizations to create the immortal cell, using the power of the god of
death himself.
And funeral rites.
That's right.
They took the god of death's power to make the immortal cell. They corrupted that power. Again, corrupted in the sense that death is not something to be feared.
Right.
Death is not something to run away from. Death is a part of life and an important one, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And they corrupted this god's power and used it for the totally opposite purpose. And judgment was the result. It was the consequence of that sin.
Yeah.
And so the greatest thing, I won't say the greatest, one of the greatest things that you can do to enrich your life, to make your life better, to help you live a more fulfilled life, is to purge yourself of the fear of death, to become confident, to become comfortable with your mortality and at peace with it, because you will live your life much more to the fullest and in much less fear, which corrupts your life, if you can come to terms with that. And so a lot of the material that we've covered, like Outer Wilds, like Jacob's Ladder, is about helping people confront that fear.
Yeah.
And this game too.
I think this game's no different in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this god, this Anubis, is trying to restore the natural balance here. The real goal is to destroy the mortal cell and return mortality.
Yes.
Right?
In a manner of that is just consummate with the laws of nature.
Yes.
Right? The one things that it's so funny because we're still just kind of talking overview on this game, but I haven't gotten into specifics much. The opening cutscene, I don't even know if you call it a cutscene, just the intro scene for the game, starts off with this city, right? And you look at the city and you notice something. There's like particles that are rising.
That's what's called the wellspring.
Yes.
And that is kind of, again, the origin of where they were drawing the power to create this immortal cell.
Particles are not supposed to go against gravity, right? There's a law of nature that is being broken here, right? Immediately. You cannot just have a part of Earth where things go up instead of down. That can't exist. It can't. Yet they made it. They made it happen. Things rise here. Particles, stars, power, energy, whatever it is. It's going up. It's not falling. And the breaking of the laws of nature, nature will prevail. Nature will win in the end, right? You're especially with the work that like Keith and others are doing. If it's consummate with the laws of nature, then so be it. That's great. But if you're just, head against a wall, just in defiance of the obvious laws of nature, something like gravity, it will win in the end. And however high you rose, that's how far you're going to fall. And so what we see from the very beginning is that this power that they have is immediately just, it's a power contrary to nature. And nature will win in the end. That's all I'm saying.
I think that's a brilliant way to put it.
Yeah.
Really brilliant. So that covers Anubis and the immortal cell and everything like that. Is there anything else that you had on Anubis or anything?
From the beginning there? On Anubis, no.
Okay.
No,
I want to talk a little bit about Judgment now. So Judgment is this malevolent entity. It's the main antagonist of the game. Serves as the game's final boss, residing deep beneath Central Town. So this I found from the wiki for Hyperlight Drifter. Judgment is seemingly a form of artificial intelligence. I thought you would like this. But is also somehow related to the disease that affects several of the drifters in the world. With Judgment showing itself in frightening and violent visions to anyone inflicted with it. It's almost like every time, in fact, I think this does happen, every time you collect 4 modules in an area, which unlocks a boss,
it kills you.
You encounter a vision of Judgment where it instills that fear back in you again, fear of death, right?
And you start limping and coughing up blood some more. And but this is the one thing we can't dodge. You know, we can dodge everything. We're a drifter. And then when this thing shows up, it's just like, boom, it just kills us like no time flat. There's nothing we can do each time we encounter it.
Yeah. How is it connected? How it's connected is unknown. Whether Judgment is truly a physical being, only visions projected physically. Now, this is an interesting point because when you kill Judgment in the finale of the game, immediately as the drifter jumps and shoves the sword down into its face, it changes into the Immortal Cell. Like immediately the whole picture changes and you're stabbing the Immortal Cell. So I could see it almost like this is not a real entity at all. It's just like a force of nature that is in your head and projecting something to you. And so you're fighting against something in your mind, which is, again, the fear of death.
Which is the point.
But the reality is he's stabbing the Immortal Cell.
The Immortal Cell itself.
And,
which
so
enables this thing to have the power it has.
Yeah.
Right? So to the extent that everybody has this fear of death, once you just feed it and give it infinite energy, like it's going to take over everything. But if you can defeat that fear, first of all, and then destroy the power source, then everything goes back to where it was.
Yeah. So the Immortal Cell that Judgment was born from was crafted by the 4 main species of the world long ago, harnessing the power of the Great Wellspring. That's those particles floating above the thing, right? In order to grant the people of the world immortality. However, some people were against the idea and corrupted its purpose. Eventually, a war in which the cell was somehow invoked broke out, ending in a cataclysmic event, that big explosion that we see in the opening cutscene.
Killed everyone.
Judgment appears to only antagonize those with the disease and to appear to each diseased in a different, unique form. So this is true because if you remember the champion, when he talks about his encounter, it's more like a centipede. It's like a centipede-looking monster rather than the one that we see. This again, confirms to me that it's not like a physical being.
It's not a physical
It's
thing,
in the mind.
Yeah.
Right.
Which does not mean it's not real.
Yeah, true.
That it doesn't exist.
Right.
It certainly does. It just looks different to different people.
And there seems to also be a connection between the Jackal or Anubis and the Immortal Cell Judgment. Both of them are represented by a diamond shape. So you have the white, purified Immortal Cell diamond shape, but then you have the corrupted version of that, which has more of that hyperlight pink kind of like color shade to it, right?
Right.
The Jackal having that light pinkish purple glowing halo shape floating around its head, and the Immortal Cell being shaped like a diamond as well. Furthermore, in the opening of Hyperlight Drifter, in a flashback to the events that caused the corruption of the world, the 4 main races of the land are depicted in stylized scenes, either offering the Jackal gifts or using something to seemingly create the Immortal Cell. So yeah, there's almost a yin-yang sort of connection between the Anubis Jackal and then Judgment on the other side of that coin.
Very interesting.
So here, I think we should move into how tarot is used in this game.
Oh, very good. Very good.
This was fascinating to me. And I think that you're more familiar with tarot than I am. And I think that you'll be able to make these connections a little bit better than I could.
Yeah, tarot has fascinated me for a long time. I've read several books on the tarot. I have done a lot of research into the tarot. While I do not own a set myself, I would like to at some point. But I have spent a lot of time thinking about this because a lot of people may not know this, but within tarot, there's what's called the minor arcana and the major arcana, right? And the arcana are, well, it's the cards, but they're set up into 2 different like spots, right? So one, I think there's like the typical face cards, the typical number cards that you have in a 52 card deck, right? That's part of the minor arcana, right? The arcana minor. But there's also a whole set of face cards that are not represented in our typical, poker playing cards that we have nowadays. And it depicts the fool's journey, what they call the fool's journey. It's got 22 cards, and it actually starts with card 0 and goes up to 21, right? So there's 22 cards total. And it's just cards of events, places, and people, like characters. And it starts off with 0 is the fool. That's the beginning. And the idea is that the fool is supposed to be you. And the fool is going through this journey in which he will have to encounter all of these things. The first one you encounter is the magician, and it goes on from there, but there's 22 of these. You've got the emperor or the empress, you've got death itself, you have the tower, you have the sun, moon, and stars. There's all sorts of things that kind of go in a sequential order. And the fact that Alex chose to go with a tarot, I don't know, was this his idea to begin with, or did the community come up with it?
I'm not sure that I know that.
Yeah. Either way,
yeah,
he's associated many of his characters with tarot cards specifically, 5 of them in particular. And the ones that he's chosen are very interesting. But the tarot journey is good because death doesn't come at the end. Death is actually in the middle of the cards that you encounter, right? So you'll have things like death and judgment and the tower, and then the sun, moon, and stars, and then kind of this card at the end that represents kind of a circle, like the unity of all things. You know, it's the fully, what Carl Jung would say, the fully integrated self, right? It's where you're trying to get after going through all of these stages. And what Alex did was he selected the drifter, and he identified him with the magician tarot card, which is card number 1 in the deck. But remember that there is a card number 0 as well, and that there is a sequence here, that you start out as a fool, but you end up as a fully integrated, balanced human after confronting all of these things. And whether you think of yourself as a fool or not, think of yourself as one when you're relating to the tarot, because the tarot was saying, you don't know what's going on, you're just going through life. In fact, many depictions of the fool on tarot cards have him about to step over a cliff. Like, there's a cliff right in front of him, and he's just, walking along, and it's like, bruh, 2 more steps, man. You're about to drop into something, right? And so the idea is you just don't know what's coming. And as you encounter all of these characters, you begin to learn what's coming. And I would contend that while the drifter is the magician because of the abilities that the drifter has, that the step before that, the card immediately before that being the fool, I would say the fool is you, that the player yourself, that when you step in to play this game, you are taking the fool's journey. And the magician is the one through which you are taking this journey, right? But that you have a place in here as well, and that there ought to be a 6th card that Alex Preston should make that is a mirror. It's got a mirror, but it's also got the cliff. It's like, don't forget the cliff. And you've got a little stick with like a bag on it. But that I think I would offer that reading here. It's not, obviously it's not official, but if Alex is going to bring up the tarot, then there are a few things that we can kind of infer based on that. One of them being that death happens in the middle of the journey before you become an integrated self. This means before you've actually died. Right? But you encounter death halfway through your life. And then that's where the real work starts, right? So if we want to go through some of these cards here, I know that you've already talked about, for instance, the Tower card. So we can talk about that one right now. So there's a card for the Tower, and the Tower that I just keep saying Alex. Is there a different way that I should?
I think that's fine. Alex Preston. Alex.
I'm assuming he made all these decisions. the card that Alex has
I do
chosen
know
to go.
That there's another writer credited on the game. So why don't we just do that real quick?
I would normally say
so we
the
don't
dev
just,
team or
don't just say Alex alone, right?
For everything, as if he made the whole game single-handedly.
So the designers on the game are Alex Preston, Bo Blythe, Teddy Deef, and Casey Hunt.
Okay.
The programmers here, Bo Blythe and Teddy Deef, or Deef. Artists, Alex Preston, Sean Ward. Writer, Casey Hunt. So
Casey
it's
Hunt was
possible
the writer.
Casey Hunt is involved in these sorts of decisions as
Very good, very good. So I just want to make sure that credit goes to where it's due. So the Tower is fascinating because the Tower is depicted by the team at Hyperlight Drifter. by Casey and Alex. By Heart Machine. They depicted it as the tower that Anubis kind of leads us into at the very beginning. Like we're walking into this tower, right? And you see a couple of them. I think there's 4. But we walk into one of them, and then the card has that showing on it. And when you look at the tarot card for the tower, you see a tower that probably is meant to be associated with the Tower of Babel to some degree. And I don't think that's too far off with the motif that this game is clearly aiming for, which is we're reaching up for this power, this immortality, this infinite power source. Basically, we're reaching up for the power of God here. And we're building this tower up so that we'll be able to escape the problems of maybe the flood, or so that we can, knock on the doors of heaven. And it just doesn't work. And that has happened many times, and the tower keeps getting rebuilt, and it has fallen many times. And this game is showing just another way yet in which the tower is insufficient, right? But Anubis leads us into this tower. And the way that there's this website that I'm using here, it's called learntarot.com. It's really good. But the way that they describe the tower here is very interesting. So tell me if you notice anything.
Okay.
The tower is the ego fortress that each of us has built around his beautiful inner core, gray, cold, and rock hard. This fortress seems to protect, but is really a prison.
As soon as you said ego, I was all over it. As soon as you said ego, I was like, I know where this is going.
Sometimes only a monumental crisis can generate enough power to smash the walls of the tower. On card 16, which is the tower, we see an enlightening bolt, which is nature, forces of nature, strike this building. It has ejected the occupants who are tumbling to their deaths. The crown indicates on one of the occupants, who's wearing a crown. The crown indicates they were once proud rulers. They are now humbled by a force stronger than they. The fool may need such a severe shakeup if he is to free himself, but the resulting revelation makes the painful experience worthwhile. That's I don't know that I need to say more.
Yeah. Right.
As soon as I read that, I was like, all right, I know which card I'm using as an example here, and why specifically Alex and Casey and the whole team at Heart Machine decided to go with tarot in order to introduce a lot of our their audience to some of these characters in a way outside of the game. It's perfect.
Yes.
It's perfect.
Yes. Yes. And ultimately, if you're listening to this and maybe you're struggling to follow along with all of this tarot and esoteric and like archetypes and stuff, if you are struggling, here's really like the core of it, right? Every one of these things we've talked about points to the same thing. Yeah. It points to a little baby
There's a theme
and
here.
A little boy,
right,
who encountered death his whole life,
right,
and was afraid all the time. And his journey in his life, not only to become comfortable and accept that reality, but to understand death can come for me at any moment, right, and I don't want to be afraid of it anymore.
Right.
I want to be okay with who I am, the life I've lived, and what I've done. And is there anything here where I currently sit that I feel would be missing if that were to come for me? Oh, here's this thing I've always wanted to say and put out there into the world. And it is at its core the message of becoming comfortable and at peace with your own death.
And that's fascinating. So it wasn't something irrelevant. What he is sharing with us his experience in art, right?
Yes.
And he's saying, you know what's important for people to know? This thing that I have learned, that he has a specific series of illnesses that are uncommon for most people to go through any of them. But we do all have something in common, that we are all going to die. He's just had to face it 1,000 times and earlier than 99.9% of everyone alive today. Mm-hmm. He has a gift. You can look at his situation and you can just feel bad for him. And to a degree, I do. I feel bad for his situation. I think that if he were to talk to me, he would say, don't feel bad for me. Like, I figured this out. I don't know that he would say this, so I'm going to stop talking as if I'm him now. I feel as though he has actually been given a gift through his suffering and through the way that he has dealt with his suffering, and that he is sharing that gift with us. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to look into your sufferings and to find a gift there. It's really hard, but he did it. And it is in part his suffering that is the gift. There's something really deep there, but it's profound. And it's right that he does have a gift. Only almost by virtue alone of the fact of his experience, he has a very valuable gift to share with all of us.
Yeah. And that's what's embodied, what you just described in the tower archetype,
in the tower tarot,
the symbol.
Yeah.
Is that struggle, that difficulty, that read it again, the part about the ego there at the beginning.
The tower is the ego fortress that each of us has built around his beautiful inner core.
There you go.
It is gray, cold, and rock hard. It seems to protect, but is really a prison.
I have talked about this so many times on this podcast, it might be ad nauseum at this point.
Just protect that ego, man. Got to protect my ego.
We exist, each one of us individually, as a human being, exists in what I like to call the prism of individual perspective.
Right. Yeah.
We can only know what we ourselves know and feel. Right. I can't know what you know and feel. You have to describe that to me with words to try to get it across. And that often fails. Communication breaks down and we don't understand each other. We only understand what's in here. We're stuck. We're trapped right here in something called the ego, which is our individual,
which we made ourselves,
perspectives, which we built and crafted into this tower that is almost like a fortress, like it says, around what the true core self is. That pure, what does it say? Pure core of the self?
Our beautiful inner core. That's it. That each of us is built around the beautiful inner core.
And that is the cause of so much of our fear. It is the cause of so much of our misunderstanding of other people around us, our lack or our inability to connect. And through experiences that I have had where my ego has been broken down, I have come to see exactly that principle. Yeah. And that is often something that many people, unfortunately, won't experience or encounter at all until their death comes for them. Until
the tower is forcibly broken by nature itself.
Yes.
So it's better to listen to Carl Jung and to say that ego you've built, because no one reads Carl Jung before midlife.
Yeah.
That ego fortress you've built over the first half of your life, start dismantling it now.
Yes.
Otherwise, it will be broken and it will destroy you.
The cure of your fear of death.
Yeah.
Is the dismantling of your ego.
Yeah. Just start taking it apart.
If you begin this work of dismantling your ego, you will find that core of what is beautiful about yourself and about life. Yes. You will find much better connections with other people.
More authentic.
You will live a more fulfilled life. And when that time does come for you, you will not be afraid.
Right. I always thought this was fascinating. I can't remember if this is in the books or not, but it's in the movie of the Harry Potter movies where they talk about the Deathly Hallows.
Oh, sure.
And that whole scene, how it ends, is that the one wise person among the three of them that ended up just kind of causing problems and killing each other, the person who had initially wished to avoid death and got the invisibility cloak, it says that at the end of that person's life, they finally willingly took off the cloak and greeted death as a friend.
Yes.
Right. And that's all that, because I saw that movie 15 years ago. That line has always stuck with me. I don't actually love that movie that much, but that's a good line right there.
It's a great line.
And to think of what it would be like to live a life where you could greet death as a friend instead of fearing it as this destructive force that shouldn't be here and that needs to go and that you have to avoid.
Yeah.
Right. Think of what your life would be like if you were able to approach it that way. And for most people, that's probably impossible to actually get there, but do the work now. And even if you don't get all the way there, like you're still probably not going to love feeling pain when you die. Like that's not going to be great. You're still probably going to like to maybe take a few more breaths when that finally happens and your brain starts shutting down. But you can do a lot more than you think, I think.
Yeah. Honestly, that's it. That's really at the core of what I think this game is trying to say.
Yeah.
And it's why it touched me so profoundly and why I think it is so relevant to all of us, to just the experience of human life and how it's broken down into archetypes that people have been using to try to tell that story or explain that. going back thousands and thousands of years. And so it's all embodied right here in this game. And it's so beautiful to me that that's never explained with a single word.
It's unbelievable.
That's
it
just
actually,
evoked in music and sound and visuals. And that's crazy how he was able to make that happen, how the team was able to make that happen. It's such a beautiful, beautiful game.
Absolutely.
And so
I almost encourage all of you to keep 3 pictures in your pocket whenever the rando
they come to ask you about you pull out the
you go to a job interview, it's like here's the 3 cards.
Build a resume of a series of 3 pictures to tell about your job history.
It might be too abstract, but there will be that one guy who will be like, I get this. It speaks to me. You're hired.
You are the perfect candidate for this position.
It makes me think, though. It makes me think, were I to pick the most impactful moments of my life, what would be those 3 pictures that would more or less, to the greatest degree possible, define my life and who I am? What are the 3 images? I don't know. I just now thought of this, but I'll bet you that you could learn a lot about yourself if you just take a while to think. And maybe even if you're a good enough artist, or even if you aren't a good artist, sketch them out. Like draw the 3 most impactful parts of your life in a way that has a setting, conflict, and resolution, and that leads to where you are now. And I'll bet you'll learn a lot about yourself in the process.
Couldn't have put it better. That's going to be it for this episode. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to watch or to listen. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more, please like the video, subscribe. Like we said, we have a lot of other stuff that touches on similar themes we've already covered in the past. Yeah, we have a huge backlog of lots and lots of analysis for you to look through.
And we also have exclusive content available specifically on Patreon, Subscribe Star, and those.
Yeah, so check those out if you'd like to support the channel. And if you know anybody who could use a message like this, even if they're not a gamer, right? A lot of times what we get into is really more just applicable to life in general, but we're just pulling those messages. Using games as the lens for that. So even if you know someone who's not a gamer, but who may enjoy or maybe need the message that we're talking about, which arguably I would think most people need it. I definitely have needed it and continue to need it in my life.
Exactly. It's a process.
Please share that with them and let them know, hey, you could clip to the part maybe that you want them to listen to or whatever it might be. Just send the time code. But please share. We appreciate that, and I'm sure that they will too if that's a message that they need. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you again next time. Peace out.
Peace.